7A2. What the Gemara just said, the Gemara brought a Breita. The Breita stated if we had twin stoves, and one stove the coals were removed, one stove the coals were not removed, and they're right next to each other. So we say you could go ahead and leave the food on the stove that the coals were removed, even though it might be receiving some heat from the other stove. And you can't leave food on the other stove that the coals were not removed. So that seems to be, both opinions seem to be going like the Rabbanan that argue on Chananya, that do not allow you to leave food even if it's 50% cooked. You can't leave it on a flame that's not covered. But we had a machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel that even when it is not, the flame has been covered, you remove the coals, or you cover the flame, what are you allowed to leave on such a flame, on such a situation when you remove the coals? Beit Shammai says, according to Rameh, you can't leave anything. Beit Hillel says you can leave liquid, but not cooked food, not food. And then we also had a machloket where and the first opinion of Meir says, once you remove the food, you cannot return. You can't return the food. You can't return it on Shabbat to this oven that the coals have been removed. However, Rabbi Yehuda argues regarding both points. Rabbi Yehuda says that Beit Hillel would allow you to return food to this stove that you removed the coals, and also Beit Hillel will allow you to leave food, both liquid and solid, before Shabbat, since you removed the coals from before Shabbat. David, you with me? Yeah. Okay. So the Gemara wants to know who is the author of our Mishnah? Because our Mishnah now, so the Gemara says, we're on the bottom of 37A2. 37A2, the bottom paragraph. If you say that our Mishnah, when our Mishnah states lo yitain, it means you can't leave food from before Shabbat unless you remove the coals from before Shabbat. So matnitin mani, which Tana of the Breita does our Mishnah go like? So Rabbi Yehuda, our Mishnah would fit exactly what Rabbi Yehuda says. Because Rabbi Yehuda is the Mishnah, our Mishnah is not clear. The Mishnah didn't elaborate what it meant, right, David? And therefore, because it didn't elaborate, the Gemara had a question: what does the Mishnah mean? But the Breita was very clear. The Breita was very clear that they're talking about leaving food from before Shabbat. That the Breita is talking about leaving food before Shabbat, and it's very clear that the Breita says you can't leave food before Shabbat on an open fire. Doesn't make a distinction whether it's 50% cooked, not 50%. You can't leave it, and therefore the Breita is very clear, not like Hananya. And the Mishnah would fit like Rabbi Yehuda. Good morning, Adam. But if you say, you understand our Mishnah lahazir, also Anna, if you want to send to the group that we're on, thank you if you don't mind, thank you very much. But if you say lahazir tanan, if you say the meaning of our Mishnah is regarding putting back food on the Shabbat, but before Shabbat you could leave food even if it's not covered, as long as 50% cooked. So therefore, if that's the case, so then matnitin our Mishnah mani lo Rabbi Yehuda lo Rameya, our Mishnah doesn't fit like either opinion, right? So that's what the Gemara. So what the Gemara wants to say at this point is the fact that we have a Breita, and we have Rabbi Yehuda on record in the Breita that says A, B, and C, and our Mishnah would seemingly only match Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. It wouldn't match Rabbi Meir's opinion. So therefore, the Gemara wants to say, good morning, Ronnie. Good morning. Good morning. Our Mishnah matches Rabbi Yehuda. It would make sense that's the understanding of the Mishnah. That is what the Mishnah meant when it says lo yitain. Lo yitain means what, David? You can't place before Shabbat food on a open fire. You have to cover up the fire. You want to keep the food there before Shabbat. You have to cover up the fire or remove the coals, and then the Gemara is interested in understanding, because if Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is the one who organized the Mishnah, right? And if he writes our Mishnah, he writes the law. He doesn't write any dissenting opinion in our Mishnah. He just says lo yitain. And if he matches Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, so then that would seem to be the law. That would seem to be not like Hananya, that you would not be allowed to leave food that's not fully cooked, and also, and it's not, if it's not fully cooked, and it's also, because even if it's fully cooked, but if it's benefiting by the cooking, it would also be a problem. The only way if the food is 50% or more cooked, you would have to remove the coals. You have to cover that fire. You have to put that blech. You have to put that sheet of metal on that fire to cover the fire. That would be, if our Mishnah only fits that opinion, if that could be the only opinion that it's going like, morning. So therefore now we could prove the halacha in a certain sense, right? Because if we could identify what our Mishnah is saying, if we can match it, then once we match it, then we got a winner, because that means most likely the halacha, the law should follow our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says the law doesn't bring an argument in it. And if Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi wrote this law, that he's writing, this is the law. And therefore we would be able to understand you can't keep food on an open flame, even if it's 50% cooked. If you could get out of it, and you could explain that the lo yitain does not mean putting foods before Shabbat, it's referring to the law of returning food on Shabbat. If you ever want to return food, good morning. If you want to put food back on a Shabbat, only way you could return food on Shabbat if there's no flame. That's the law of returning food. If you want to return food to a stove, it has to have no flame. That's the allowance to return food. That has to have no flame. But before Shabbat, maybe you could have a flame on and leave the food there before Shabbat, right? Adam, is it clear? The whole question of our Gemara is, can I leave food before Shabbat on a flame that's 50%, that is 50% cooked? 50% cooked, 60% not. We're not food that we maybe have a concern. There's a possible concern. You might want to rake it. You might want to stoke it. Why might you want to stoke it? Because it's only 50% cooked. It's not fully cooked. I might want to stoke it. If it's less than 50% cooked or less than 33%, depending, then everybody would agree that you can't leave food on an open flame. Nobody would say if the food is only 20% cooked, 25% cooked. There's a question between 33 and 50%, but let's say we're strict. The opinion that allows open flame, let's say we're going to go with only if it's 50% cooked. If it didn't reach 50% cooked, we're afraid you might stoke it, because there's so much more needed, and it's not edible as is if it's less than 50% cooked. Once it reached the mark of 50% cooked, that means it is already considered edible. For someone who's really on the move, like there was something called a ben drosai, a certain bandit, a certain thief, he would eat food. They eat the food the first opportunity they'd be able to eat it, because they don't have time to hang around, right? They can't stay in one place. They're afraid they're going to get caught, right, David? So once it's edible for them to eat it, then it's morning, Mark.
Morning, Rabbi.
Morning. So happy Hanukkah. So that is the issue of the Gemara. The issue of the Gemara is when a food reached 50%, it's already edible for a guy who's on the move. Are we afraid you might come to stoke that flame, that coals, those coals? So Hanania says we're not afraid. We don't have the rabbis don't need to make a decree, a limitation, a fence when it's 50%. They don't have to make a fence to say don't leave the food there before Shabbat. He's not concerned that you're going to come to stoke it because you're not so nervous about the food. You're relaxed. You already can eat it already. When the Shabbat entered, already was edible, very rare, but it's edible to be eaten. He's not so concerned you're going to be so busy with the food. And therefore, he says you can leave the food, Hananya says, when it's 50% cooked on an open flame. The Chacham, the Rambam say, no, 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 no. If the food can't benefit from stoking, you can't leave the food before Shabbat on that fire. Because you might want to stoke that fire. You didn't show us that you didn't do anything to show us that you're not interested in stoking that fire. If you went ahead and it was 50% cooked and you covered the fire, now you're showing me you're not interested in stoking it. You covered it up. Or if you put ash or if you remove the coals, you're clearly showing me you're really not really interested in the fire anymore. You got rid of the coals. But if you did not remove the coals or cover the coals, the Chacham say we are concerned you might come to stoke that fire. And stoking a fire on Shabbat is a violation of one of the 39 malachot of Shabbat, of making a fire. So that is the issue here, what's going on. So when we talk about Shabbat in your kitchen, this food before Shabbat, this is some of the issue what we're dealing with. So, and the way we said this morning, what we left off yesterday, is that the Gemara wants to understand who does our Mishnah go like? What is the meaning of our Mishnah? Because the Mishnah should be a good indication of what the law is, what the halacha is. Is that clear? Ezra, right? Got it right. The Mishnah will be clear because the Mishnah stated a blanket rule without any different opinions about this rule of lo yitain. And if lo yitain means you can't place it before Shabbat on a fire unless you remove the coals, if that's what it means, so then that is the opinion. Whose opinion is that? That's the opinion of the Chachamim, that they're concerned, even if it's 50% cooked, you can't leave it there. But if lo yitain means it's not referring to putting food before Shabbat, if lo yitain means you can't return food on Shabbat to an open flame, but that the inference would be you can't return food to an open flame on Shabbat. But to place food before Shabbat on an open flame, maybe you would be allowed to if it reached a certain level of cooking of 50%. That is in a nutshell, right, David? I brought you up to date. That is a discussion of the Gemara. And now what the Gemara is up to today is the Gemara brought a Breita of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, two different rabbis, but both rabbis agree you can't leave food on an open fire before Shabbat. And Rabbi Yehuda's opinion fits exactly, if you would say the Mishnah is, if you explain the Mishnah, lo yitain means you can't place food before Shabbat unless you remove the coals, that will fit with Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, because Rabbi Yehuda has also an understanding of what Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel are arguing in. See, there's another issue going on in the Gemara. The other issue going on in the Gemara is there is an argument between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. And we have two different opinions of what Beit Shammai says and what Beit Hillel says. How far Rabbi Shammai is going to be strict, or how lenient will Beit Hillel go. And our Mishnah had Beit Hillel being lenient about the Beit Hillel treated solid food and not solid food the same. Solid and liquid the same. That's how in our Mishnah we have the recording of Beit Hillel's opinion. In the Breita, we have Rabbi Yehuda saying the same thing. He treats the solids and the liquids. You want to return to a return to a stove food that was taken off. You can return it if you want. You can return it if it's both. If the stove has, if the flames have been covered, you can return both solid food, both liquid. If there's no flame, Beit Hillel will allow. It doesn't make a difference between solid and not solid. That opinion is what we have in our Mishnah, and that is what Rabbi Yehuda says in the Breita. So our Mishnah, if we understand, when the Mishnah says lo yitain, it means don't place food before Shabbat unless you remove the coals. That law and the law of the argument between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel fits exactly like Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, the Gemara wants to suggest our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. And if our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, because it seems to line up exactly, because if we don't say our Mishnah is going like Rabbi Yehuda, if you explain the Mishnah some other way, then the Mishnah doesn't seem to be going like any opinion, not like Rabbi Meir, not like Rabbi Yehuda. And we rather say that it's going like one of those opinions. Not that it's, it's just a new thing that we never saw before. That we don't know anybody on record has such opinions. And that's what the Gemara is holding today. Let's see it again. The bottom of the page of 37a, 2 on the bottom. Amrit Bishlama, if you explain Lasho Tanan, that the Mishnah is referring to that it's restricting you from leaving food before the Shabbat unless you remove the coals, unless you cover the flame. So Matnita Mani, who's the author of our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, he fits in like Rabbi Yehuda. But if but if you say that the word lo yitain of the Mishnah, then if you say the Mishnah is not talking about before the Shabbat, the Mishnah is only restricting you from placing food. If you want to return food on Shabbat, has to be returned to a no flame. But you could but you're allowed to put food before Shabbat on an open flame for 50%. If that's the case, matnit and mani, if you're going to explain our Mishnah that way, who is the author of our Mishnah? Lo Rabbi Yehuda v'lo Rabbi Meir. It's not Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. Because Rabbi Meir, if it's Rabbi Meir, kasha leBeit Shammai v'chada, it would be a contradiction to Beit Shammai. It's going against what Rabbi Meir said in Beit Shammai in one point, and Beit Hillel b'tarti. And in 2 points, he's not lining up with Beit Hillel in 2 points. And Rabbi Yehuda, and if the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, if our Mishnah is going like Rabbi Yehuda, kasha grufa ktuma, meaning if the Mishnah is going like Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda says clearly that it has to be, you have to remove the coals, you have to cover. If our Mishnah is saying that you don't have to remove the coals, it's not going like Rabbi Yehuda. So it doesn't fit. Our Mishnah doesn't fit. If the Mishnah if our Mishnah is allowing the placing of food before Shabbat on an open flame once it's 50% cooked, it doesn't fit Rabbi Meir, it doesn't fit Rabbi Yehuda, and Rashi will go through explain more detail about that. But that's what the Gemara said. Doesn't line up. So the Gemara says, "L'olam emelach." I will tell you lahazitna. Really, the Gemara said, no, you know what? I could get out of it. No proof. Maybe you could explain our Mishnah, that our Mishnah would allow you, the Mishnah is only prohibiting you from returning food on Shabbat to an open flame. And really, you could go ahead and place food on Shabbat on an open flame, before Shabbat, on an open flame, as long as it's 50% cooked. But the Tana Didan, our Tana, Savala Rabbi Yehuda b'chada, upolig ala Rabbi Yehuda b'chada. He agrees with Rabbi Yehuda in one aspect, and he doesn't agree with Rabbi Yehuda in another aspect. Meaning, he holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Our Tana is an agreement to Rabbi Yehuda that regarding the argument of Beit Shammai or Beit Hillel, meaning both in our Mishnah and both in Rabbi Yehuda, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel are arguing regarding the leaving of hot foods and liquids and solid foods, that Beit Hillel agrees that there's no difference between hot and liquid, and Beit Shammai only allows hot. And also, Notlin Machzirin, regarding the law of removing food and returning food, that Beit Shammai forbade you to return food on Shabbat to an oven that's even if it's you remove the coals, and Beit Hillel says you could return when the coals are removed. But they're arguing. The Mishnah is arguing Rabbi Yehuda in one aspect. The Ilu Tana Didan, our Tana Sava holds Lishhold, you're allowed to leave food, Afapi, She'ena Gorof Kotum. Our Mishnah is arguing in one aspect, that leaving food, if you did not remove the coals, you're allowed to leave. If it's open fire, you're allowed to leave it. But Rabbi Yehuda holds, Lashot Nami, if you want to leave the food, you also have to have Gorof Kotum in, has to have covered the fire. Ilolo. But if you did not cover the fire, you cannot leave. If you did not cover the fire, you can't leave. So let's explain what the Gemara is saying over here. The one who asked the question, our Gemara, he thought that the Mishnah most probably is going like one of the rabbis, one of the Rabbi Yehuda or a Rameya, right? And being that's the case, if our Mishnah is going like Rabbi Yehuda and Rameya, and both Rabbi Yehuda and Rameya state that you can't leave food before Shabbat on an open fire, so our Mishnah most likely is going our Mishnah is probably taking one of those opinions, and therefore our Mishnah is taking the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore we could prove for law halacha that you can't leave food on an open fire even if 50% cooked, because that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. But the Gemara answers that we don't, not necessarily does our Mishnah have to fit, one of those Tanoim completely. As long as, you could say, our Mishnah could be in sync with one of the Tanoim within certain things that he said. To say that the Mishnah would totally disagree with everybody on record, that's a far shot to say. But to say that the Mishnah is in agreement with one of the rabbis within certain aspects, and he might argue on a different aspect, so you could say there's a third opinion now on the table. Now we're saying we have a third opinion. We have Rabbi Yehuda, we have Rameya, and we have our Mishnah, which is like taking like Hananiah's opinion, which our Mishnah is stating that you're allowed to leave food on. According to this, you could explain, meaning you're not forced. The Gemara was thinking in its question, right? You're trying to bring a proof, right? You're trying to make a case, right, Mark? The Gemara was making the case. The Gemara wanted to say, who does we have recorded in this Breita, when we're discussing this argument, we have this recorded between Rabbi Yehuda and Meir, and the Gemara was thinking the Mishnah follows, and we have Yehuda and Meir, and we have multiple statements, and they're discussing multiple things. They're discussing, the laws of leaving food before Shabbat. They're discussing the details of what the type of foods regarding certain cases of returning, not returning, liquid, solid, And in all aspects, our Tan of our Mishnah fits Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. But now, and therefore the Gemara thought, therefore our Mishnah is going like Rabbi Yehuda. But now the Gemara is what I mean that the author of our Mishnah is the Gemara was thinking the author of our Mishnah it would be like one of the two. I mean, if we have recorded an argument in the Breita, so in this Breita, the Gemara was thinking that it seems that we would say that the Mishnah is going like one of those two rabbis. But now the Gemara says, you know what? We know we have on record Hananya. We do have this dissenting opinion that Hananya went on record and said that you could leave food before Shabbat even though it's not fully cooked on an open flame. The Gemara wants to say maybe our Mishnah is taking Hananya's position. I mean, the Gemara in its question thought it's not taking Hananya's position because the Gemara in its question it seems that the Gemara was thinking it's taking Rabbi Yehuda's position because it seems to line up like Rabbi Yehuda in all aspects. And everything that Rabbi Yehuda said about solid, the argument of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, what exactly are they arguing in? Everything fit like Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara was thinking also Rabbi Yehuda is after Hillel and Shammai. Because if you look, if they're quoting, good morning, because they are quoting the argument of Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. Good morning. See, if we have in the Breita, right, Rabbi Yehuda and Nasi is the one who recorded the Mishnah, correct?
Which is different than this.
This Rabbi Yehuda, let's say it's the same Rabbi Yehuda and Nasi.
But still.
They came earlier. Shammai and Hillel came earlier. Earlier, much because like he's saying, the Mishnah Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he brings Beit Shammai Beit Hillel, right?
Right. So there was no written oral Torah when
Right. And he was quoting them, and therefore that's why you could have disagreements of what they said, right? So what did Beit Shammai? This rabbi said he said this. It wasn't recorded. It wasn't written down. Right, the yeshiva of Shammai. Right, the Beit Shammai Beit Hillel is like the students. It's Hillel and Shammai, the rabbis themselves, and the Beit is the house, the yeshiva of Shammai and the yeshiva, right? And they're arguing of what Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel held. Now sometimes it's possible also that the yeshiva held a certain way, and maybe later on they might have changed their opinion. It's possible also, but so we have Rabbi Yehuda quoting Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel a certain way. And Rabbi Meir is quoting Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, right? Our Mishnah exactly says the same quote of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel that Rabbi Yehuda says. So the Gemara was thinking that our Mishnah is exactly as Rabbi Yehuda. And you know what Rabbi Yehuda says? You can't leave food before Shabbat on an open flame. Case dismissed. Therefore, the Gemara thought, I got my guy. He's the man. He's the author of our Mishnah. Now the Gemara shoots say, hey, don't take. You know what? Not necessarily. The Gemara says, David. The Gemara says, you know what? It's true if you understand our Mishnah the way you want to understand it. It could fit exactly in all aspects of Rabbi Yehuda. But it's possible. We could go back to what we said before. We could say lo yitain means it's lo yitain is not referring to before Shabbat. It's referring to on Shabbat. You can't return to an open flame, but maybe you could put food before Shabbat on an open flame if it's 50% cooked or more. And our Mishnah would go like Hananya that allows that, and it's not totally against but he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda and how Rabbi Yehuda understands Shammai, Beit Shammai, and Beit Hillel. So therefore, the Gemara now, the fact that it has some agreement to Rabbi Yehuda, So we could say, we don't have to say that our Mishnah is following Rabbi Yehuda's opinion in all aspects. And is Rabbi Yehuda. It could be our Mishnah is someone else. But you know what? The fact that I argue on you in this, and I agree with you in that. Therefore, it's a third opinion, and that's what the Gemara wants to state. Now, all right, all this is right. All this is rabbinic law to understand. Do we have a fence? Did the rabbis create a fence on placing before Shabbat a pot of food on an open flame, which is pot of food is 50% cooked or more? Can I place that food? Now, and on that, and on that, right. And then we have, depending how we, according to Beit Hillel, right? So, and then we have what Mark said. We're going to liquid and solid. The Beit Shammai will make a distinction between liquid and solid. And meaning even if, it depends how you understand the Mishnah, right? If you understand the Mishnah, but this morning, we're just to bring you up to date, we're talking about, can a person leave food that's 50% cooked on a fire before Shabbat and the fire is not covered? 50% or more cooked? Are we afraid? What do you say? On an open flame, are we afraid that you might come to stoke the coals? That's the question here. Are we concerned that you might come to stoke coals on Shabbat? Or do we say we're not concerned? Do you have to cover the flame before Shabbat? Do you have to have a metal sheet on top of the flame before Shabbat, like a blech? We call a blech before Shabbat. Or you don't need a blech. That is. Now I wanted to mention a point yesterday. We mentioned yesterday. What is the opinion? The opinion of the Rabbanan, the Chacham say if you want to, if it's 50% cooked, it's not enough. We're afraid you're going to come stoke it, right? And as long as you'll have an improvement by stoking it, by increasing the fire, the rabbis are concerned. Don't leave the pot there. I don't care if it's 75% cooked before Shabbat. You have to cover the fire before Shabbat. That will show you're not going to come stoke it, right? You cover the fire. You show you're not interested in playing around with the coals. You covered it up, or you put some ash on it to cover it up. At what point would the rabbis allow you to leave a pot on an open flame? We touched on it yesterday. Even the rabbis should say you can't leave a pot on a flame that's more than 50%, unless it's. But if it's fully cooked, and the more it's cooking, it's not improving, just keeping it hot, but it's not improving. It's not improving the food. The food is getting, it's diminishing. The food is getting less. It's cooking out. But you ever have a soup, right? When soup reaches a certain level, right, and you don't want it to cook anymore, so it's just getting. Right. So the Chachamim, we're going to see the Gemara, we'll see inside. I'm just shedding light on something the Gemara didn't discuss yet. The Chachamim should allow, correct, a food that's on a fire that's not, that there's no concern that you're gonna come to increase the flame. Why? Because it's already fully cooked, and the more it's cooking, it's not getting better. It's not improving. It's really getting less.
We're not worried about touching the flame.
You're not touching. Are you going to touch the flame, Robert? Are you going to touch the flame? Right, and we said maybe we're not worried about that. You're going to come lower the flame because maybe that might not. Because we spoke about that yesterday, double Rabbana, whatever, possibly. But if you would leave that, not right, might not be the same level of. But if you would go ahead but you know what, you still don't, you know why? But you still want to cover that flame if you ever want to put food back. Meaning, if I have a pot of soup, right? And I have a pot of whatever, something, and if I want to pick it up and I want to put it back, so you never could put back food on an open flame. So even if it was fully cooked, because that looks like cooking, right? If you take a food and you put on an open flame on the Shabbat itself, so practically, you might want to even 100% cooking, and even if the food is getting not improving, but the longer it's staying on the fire, but we have a different issue. There's something how something looks in life. We don't want you to do something that looks like you're cooking. Is that clear, Shabbat? You don't want to look like, you don't want to be a looking person like cooking. So therefore, if technically you would leave that pot on the fire before Shabbat, and the pot, and you really, it's not beneficial. It's not the higher the flame is not making it better at a certain point on the soup. You know what I'm saying? At a certain point on the soup, the higher the flame. But I'm saying we're talking about it's ready before Shabbat. Place or even on Shabbat, even liquid. Mark, what you're saying, that if the question would be liquid that's fully cooked and is boiling hot, it's not a question of recooking, right? I mean, if let's say I have a tea kettle on a old-fashioned tea kettle. Have you ever heard of tea kettles once like that? Right? I have a tea kettle, right? And the tea kettle is fully cooked. It's steaming. The portion. If I want to take the tea kettle, I want to pick it up. It's on. Let's say it's on the blech, and if I poured some water, I didn't pour it on the tea bag directly because that would be cooking the tea bag, right? You have to. There's a way of making tea on Shabbat, right? How you make tea. You can't take boiling hot water, pouring on a tea bag, right? Am I right? That's cooking the leaves. These are raw leaves, right? So there's a way to do it, right? But then if I'm holding the tea kettle in my hand, then I want to put it back. I can put it back onto the blech. Why could I put it back on the blech? Because it's not recooking. It's already cooked. It's boiling hot. It's hot. But taking a liquid that's dry, that's cold, that I can't put. You see the difference, Mark? I can't take a cold liquid, a soup, from my refrigerator on Shabbat, and we don't put it on a blech. We don't put a cold liquid on a blech. We are strict about that, even though it was fully cooked. There's a discussion we're going to see more about as we go. With adding more every day. Hopefully, we're getting a better, broader understanding of. Right. But the way I think I say how we do the tea is we do a kli shlishi. What we do is you take a cup, the water goes. Let's say you fill up a cup of hot water. That's called the kli rishon is the pot that's on the fire, the urn. You fill up the cup. That's the second. That's called the second kos. And then you fill up that cup of water and you pour that cup into another cup. That's called the kli shlishi. Right. So if you're playing using two cups. You fill up one cup with hot water, and now that you put that water in that cup, it's like the walls of the cup cool off a drop, and then you pour that water into that cup into a second cup. Okay, and then you put the tea bag in. Then you've got. That's how you can make the tea on Shabbat. Or what a lot of people do is before Shabbat they already take tea bags and they put the water on the tea bags before Shabbat. So they already cooked the tea bags before Shabbat. That's called sense. And then on the Shabbat, and they keep that sense warm, however, and then on Shabbat, they can add that to a cup of hot water. So no, that's the Ashkenazic way. Okay, we'll talk more about that. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's a Hanukkah gift. It's a Hanukkah present.
Thank you, Rabbi.
This is the type of gift we like every day. Thank you so much. Okay, no, we missed you. I was thinking of you. Very nice. Very nice. You can ask Adam. Yeah, he was there. You want to know how it was?
Great. And excellent as always.
He spoke.
Oh, really?
Mr. Lowe, have a great day.
Yeah, a couple months ago, we were on the Hanukkah fire.